The vast emptiness of space was filled with the low hum of engines as the Dominion fleet approached Earth. Grand Admiral Vexus, a towering figure with 6 bulbous eyes and his distinctive dark exoskeleton, stood at the command center of the inevitable Victory, the Dominion's flagship. His sharp, jagged mandibles clicked with tension as he watched the stars in front of him. Earth was just ahead, a planet teeming with primitive life, a planet they would soon dominate. The Dominion had conquered 17 civilizations over the course of 3 millennia, using the same strategy every time: arrive in overwhelming force, obliterate the defenders, and claim the planet. There was no reason to believe this time would be any different. "Sir, we have entered the solar system," reported Commander Zolter, his voice cold but steady as he looked at the holographic display. "We are approaching Earth." Vexus smiled, a cruel grin stretching across his face. "Good, prepare the fleet for the initial assault. We will begin with orbital bombardment. Earth's defenses won't stand a chance." His voice, though deep and commanding, was laced with an edge of arrogance. He had seen it all before: the panic, the desperation of the species before their inevitable submission. "Yes, Grand Admiral," Zolter replied, his 6 eyes glowing faintly. But there was something in his voice, something that made Vexus pause for just a moment. Zolter had served with Vexus for over 20 years, and yet there was a flicker of unease in the commander's gaze that Vexus couldn't quite place. Perhaps he was simply overthinking things. Vexus waved away the thought. He had conquered entire star systems. There was no way that a backwater planet like Earth could pose any real challenge. Meanwhile, aboard the Earth Defense Fleet's flagship, the relentless Curiosity, Admiral Tanya Jackson stood at the head of her command center, her eyes fixed on the large holographic display before her. The humans had known for days that the Dominion was coming. Their spies had infiltrated the Dominion's networks, tracking their movements, understanding their technology, and gathering intel. "You sure about this?" Commander Raj Patel asked, his brow furrowed in concern. The mission ahead was dangerous, far more dangerous than anything the humans had ever faced. The Dominion was notorious for its technological superiority and ruthless tactics. Jackson didn't blink. "Absolutely, we're not about to let them waltz in here like they own the place." The holographic display zoomed in on the approaching Dominion fleet. It was massive, a starry battalion of warships gleaming with sharp angles, every ship exuding an aura of cold, merciless power. Jackson couldn't help but admire the beauty of it. It was impressive, dangerous, but it was also predictable. Admiral Patel continued, "We've detected their fleet. I'm reading their cloaking devices powering up if we don't act fast." "Don't worry," Jackson interrupted, her calm voice unwavering. "We've been preparing for this day for years. Activate the shield network and signal Delta Squadron." The moment the Dominion fleet dropped out of hyperspace, Vexus felt something shift in the air. Something was wrong. His sensors were picking up unusual readings, strange fluctuations in the energy fields around him. The cloaking technology that had never failed them before was suddenly being disrupted by something human. "Sir, they've detected us," Zolter said, his voice now laced with panic. "The humans are mobilizing their fleet faster than we predicted." Vexus's eyes narrowed. "Impossible," he muttered, tapping at the console in front of him. "Our cloaking technology is flawless. The humans couldn't possibly." Before he could finish his sentence, a voice crackled through the comm system, so casual, so bored, that it sent a chill down Vexus's spine. "Yeah, Delta Squadron," the human voice said, breaking through the static. "We've got about 2,000 cloaked Dominion ships approaching from Vector 227. Standard formation, nothing creative. Ready for some target practice? My kid's got a soccer game at 1800 hours, and I promised I wouldn't miss it this time." Zolter's mandibles clicked nervously. "What are they saying?" The voice continued, unfazed. "Copy that, Captain Barnes. Let's wrap this up quickly. I've got a hot date tonight, and I'd rather not show up smelling like fried alien circuitry." Vexus's blood ran cold. "Laughing? They're laughing at us?" His voice cracked in disbelief, unable to comprehend the audacity of it. The humans weren't afraid. They weren't even taking this seriously. "Sir," Lieutenant Crows interrupted, his voice quivering with urgency. "You need to see this." Vexus turned to the view screen. What he saw froze him in place. The human fleet wasn't scrambling as he had expected. They weren't panicking. They weren't disorganized at all. Instead, the human ships were moving with precise, calculated efficiency. They were arranging themselves in a formation Vexus's tactical computers couldn't identify. It was something new, something that made no sense. "What are they doing?" Vexus whispered, his voice faltering for the first time in his career. "Unknown, sir," Zoltar replied, his voice filled with confusion. "But they are broadcasting this on all frequencies, too. They want us to see it." The screen split into a view of the human fleet, which was now moving with terrifying precision. The ships had arranged themselves into a formation, something unlike anything Vexus had seen before. It was symmetrical, tight, yet chaotic, a paradox that made the Dominion's ships look sloppy and disorganized in comparison. "What are they doing?" Vexus repeated, his voice shaking with growing concern. "They are mocking us," Zoltar said in disbelief. "They know we're here." On Earth's flagship, Admiral Jackson remained composed, watching the enemy fleet through her own holographic display. The human fleet had already begun to assemble into the Gordian knot formation, a maneuver only humans could have created. A formation so complex, so mathematically precise, that it left the Dominion fleet in complete disarray. "Ready for Phase 1, Jackson ordered. Her fingers moved over the controls, activating the first wave of energy pulses designed to disrupt the Dominion's cloaking and defensive systems. "Sir," reported one of the officers, "massive energy spikes from the human fleet. They're about to fire." Vexus's eyes widened. Evasive maneuvers now. But it was too late. The first wave of energy hit the Dominion fleet with a force that made Vexus's ship lurch. The screen flashed blindingly bright, and in that instant, nearly 300 of the Dominion's ships simply ceased to exist. There were no explosions, no debris. They were just gone. "Impossible," Zoltar gasped. "What weapons are they using?" The ship's AI responded in its usual monotone voice, its words carrying an eerie calm. "Unknown technology detected. Preliminary analysis suggests quantum displacement weaponry. Theoretical only until now." Vexus staggered back, his grip tightening around the armrests of his command chair. "Quantum displacement?" He was shaking now, unable to believe what he was hearing. "That's impossible." "Sir," Lieutenant Crows interrupted again, his voice shaky. "We're receiving a transmission from the human fleet. They wish to speak with you directly." Vexus, still reeling from the assault, gritted his teeth. "Put it through." The transmission screen flickered, and there in the center of the image was a human woman sitting casually in a command chair. Her dark skin and short, curly hair framed a face that radiated confidence and composure, despite the dire situation. She was sipping from a mug that said "World's Okayest Admiral." "Hello, Grand Admiral Vexus of the Galactic Dominion," the woman said, her voice cool and unbothered. "I'm Admiral Tanya Jackson of the Earth Defense Fleet. I'd say it's a pleasure to meet you, but we both know that would be a lie." Vexus's jaw dropped. "You," he stammered, "how dare you speak to me like this?" Vexus's anger boiled over as he stared at the calm, smiling face of Admiral Tanya Jackson. The audacity of it all. Here he was, Grand Admiral of the Dominion, a being who had led his empire to conquer 17 civilizations, reduced to the helpless leader of a fleet on the brink of annihilation. And yet this human, sitting casually in her chair as if this were some trivial skirmish, had the nerve to address him with such blatant disrespect. "How dare you speak to me like this?" Vexus snarled, his voice filled with venom. His mandibles clicked as he leaned forward, his eyes narrowing into slits. Jackson didn't flinch. She simply took another sip from her mug, her gaze never leaving the screen. "What, you don't like my mug? It was a gift from my wife. It's a reminder to keep things in perspective." She set the mug down, her demeanor cool and collected, almost annoyingly so. "But let's skip the pleasantries. You've come a long way, Vexus, but I don't think you came here expecting a friendly chat. So what's it going to be?" For a moment, Vexus couldn't speak. The sheer gall of this human. How could someone so insignificant have the power to make him feel like this? His fists clenched around the arms of his chair, his claws digging into the metallic surface. "Explain yourself, human," Vexus growled. "You've invaded our territory, attacked our fleet, and now you sit there as if you've already won." Jackson leaned forward slightly, her expression softening but still maintaining an air of authority. "I'm not here to gloat, Vexus. Honestly, this could have gone much worse for you, but we're not about to commit genocide because that's not who we are. We've studied your empire, your methods, and we know exactly how this ends. You know the drill: we beat you, you surrender, you beg for mercy. And that's not going to happen." The words hit harder than any weapon the humans had used so far. Vexus felt his chest tighten. No, they weren't here to kill him, they were here to humiliate him. to make him realize that his empire, built on domination, was no longer fit to rule. "Mercy," Vexus spat, his teeth bared. "You talk of mercy, yet you stand before me, a mere primate species, pretending you have anything to offer that could match the Dominion's might. Do you not realize who you are dealing with?" Jackson's lips curled into a tight smile. "Oh, we realize exactly who you are, Vexus, and that's why we're here, actually. We've been monitoring your little empire-building project for years. 17 civilizations, that's cute, but you should know something about us. While you were busy conquering planets that barely knew how to fly, we were preparing for something much worse than you. We were preparing for the possibility of fighting gods." Vexus's heart skipped a beat. The confidence in Jackson's voice was chilling. The fact that she believed this so firmly made him question everything he had thought he knew about the humans. Gods, were they truly so powerful? "You're bluffing," he growled, though he wasn't sure if it was an accusation or a question. "No species could be this prepared." "Maybe we just think ahead," Jackson said, her eyes narrowing. "See, Vexus, here's the thing. The Dominion operates on predictability. You follow the same patterns over and over again. You think you're unbeatable, but the truth is you've become so predictable that we were able to anticipate everything you'd do. We knew exactly how you would approach Earth. And frankly, we were bored of waiting for you to get here." She wasn't bluffing. Vexus felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead as the enormity of her words sank in. They had been waiting for him. How could that be possible? How could a species so young, so inexperienced in the ways of the galaxy, be so far ahead in their thinking? It didn't make sense. But there it was, undeniable in the cold blue of her eyes, the truth he didn't want to face. "Do you think your fleet's numbers mean anything to us?" Jackson continued, her tone now sharp. "You might outnumber us, but that's the problem, isn't it? You're too reliant on your size and your power. While you've been conquering, we've been learning to adapt, to think in ways you never could, and that's why we're going to win." Vexus's mind raced as the full weight of Jackson's words pressed down on him. Every shred of his pride screamed at him to resist, to find some way to overpower her, to tear apart this mockery of a negotiation. But the truth was becoming inescapable. The humans had outthought him. They had outmaneuvered him. "I'll never surrender to you," Vexus finally spat, his voice full of fury. "You may have caught us off guard, but this is far from over. I'll burn your planet to the ground before I let you dictate terms to me." Jackson raised an eyebrow as if she had expected this response. "Funny," she said, her voice cool, "but I think you're forgetting something important. You're the one who's surrounded. You're the one with a fleet that's lost its edge. And now you're the one whose fate lies in our hands." Vexus looked at her, unable to shake the feeling that Jackson wasn't just talking about his fleet, she was talking about him. His empire, his legacy, his entire way of life. Everything he had built was crumbling in front of him. "Admiral," Lieutenant Crows interrupted, his voice trembling, "we're picking up a massive energy spike from the human fleet. It's unlike anything we've ever seen before. They're preparing to launch something." Jackson's voice came through the comm again, her words casual but deadly serious. "I'll give you a choice, Vexus. Surrender unconditionally, and we'll take you to Earth for talks. We'll show you what it means to live in a galaxy where peace and cooperation are the rule, not war. You might actually learn something. Or we can continue this fight, and you'll find out exactly how far we're willing to go to protect our people." Vexus's chest tightened, the decision before him more unbearable than any battle he had fought. The Dominion had always been about control, about domination. But now, for the first time, he was the one who didn't have a choice. The humans had forced his hand. The real question wasn't whether he would win, it was whether he could find a way to accept the unimaginable, that he had lost. He glanced at Zoltar, whose eyes showed the same doubt that had been creeping into Vexus's heart. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words never came. The screen flashed. A massive energy field, unlike anything the Dominion had ever encountered, surrounded the fleet. Systems began to fail. Vexus's heart raced. Was this it? Would the humans end them now? "Make your decision, Vexus." Jackson's voice came through again, the calm certainty in it now feeling like a noose around his neck. "We're waiting." The silence on the bridge of the inevitable victory was suffocating. Vexus's eyes darted across the screens, his mind a whirl of chaos. The humans had unleashed a force beyond anything he had ever anticipated. His fleet was surrounded, crippled, and powerless with no clear way out. The cold, logical words of Admiral Jackson echoed in his ears. "Make your decision, Vexus. We're waiting." For a long moment, Vexus could only sit there, staring at the view screen, his mind racing. The last few centuries of his life, everything he had worked for, every conquest, every victory, felt irrelevant. It had all led him to this moment, this choice. "Surrender," Zoltar said quietly, breaking the oppressive silence. His voice was surprisingly gentle, filled with an emotion Vexus had never expected to hear from him. "We have no other option, Grand Admiral. We are defeated." Vexus turned to Zoltar, his sharp mandibles clicking in frustration. His second-in-command's words cut through him like a blade. Zoltar had always been loyal, steadfast in the face of danger. But now even Zoltar saw the writing on the wall. The truth that had been lurking in the shadows, ignored by the Dominion for centuries, was undeniable. They were no longer the galaxy's apex predators. The humans had outsmarted them at every turn. "We can't surrender," Vexus growled, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. "Not like this, not to them." "Perhaps it's time to learn," Zoltar said, his voice heavy with the weight of years of unspoken doubt. "Perhaps it's time we acknowledge that our ways have led us here to this moment of reckoning. We are no longer the victors, Vexus, and they are not just some species to conquer. We've underestimated them. I've watched them fight, adapt, and survive. Maybe they can show us something we've forgotten." Vexus didn't respond at first. His mind was still processing the impossible truth that these humans, these primitives, had somehow found a way to outmaneuver him, to defeat him. And yet, as much as it pained him, he couldn't ignore the flicker of respect growing inside him. Humans were not like the other species the Dominion had conquered. They were resilient, innovative, unpredictable. Could they truly be trusted? "We're surrounded, Grand Admiral," Zoltar said again, his voice rising in urgency. "The humans are waiting for your answer. If we don't surrender now, they will destroy us. They have the power to do it." Vexus's claws gripped the armrests of his chair. His eyes shifted toward the view screen once more, where Jackson's calm, composed face stared back at him. She wasn't angry. She wasn't smug. She simply waited as if she knew he would make the right decision in the end, and that, more than anything, unsettled him. He had never been one to show weakness, but this was different. This was not just about a battle. This was about the future of the Dominion. His empire, built on centuries of conquest and power, was teetering on the edge of collapse. His people had always relied on strength, their weapons, their numbers, their intimidation. But now they faced a species that didn't rely on brute force. They didn't need to destroy the Dominion. They simply needed to outlast it, and they had. "Very well," Vexus said finally, his voice strained with the weight of his decision. "We surrender." The words felt like a knife in his throat. The once proud Dominion had been humbled. He had been humbled. But in that moment, he knew it was the only choice left. A tense silence followed his words. The entire bridge seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for some unseen force to intervene. But no force came. Instead, Jackson's voice echoed through the comm system, calm and matter-of-fact. "Thank you, Grand Admiral," she said. "Your decision will be remembered. We'll begin the formal process of your surrender immediately." On Earth's flagship, Admiral Jackson exhaled deeply, her hands clasped behind her back as she turned to face her officers. The Dominion had been one of the most feared forces in the galaxy, and now it was submitting to them. It had all gone according to plan, but the victory was hollow. She had never wanted this outcome. Her goal had never been to destroy an entire civilization. It had always been about survival, about finding a way to ensure humanity's future, to prove that Earth was not just a target, but a force to be reckoned with. "We've won," Commander Patel said quietly, his voice laced with relief but also with uncertainty. "But at what cost? They're the Dominion. What happens now?" Jackson turned to him, her expression unreadable. "We don't destroy them, Raj. Not unless we have to. We've already proven that we can win without bloodshed, but we'll need to rebuild what's been lost, and we'll need to help them rebuild, too." "But they've been a scourge across the galaxy for millennia," Patel said, shaking his head. "Can we really trust them? Can we trust Vexus?" Jackson paused, considering the question. "That's the real challenge, isn't it? Trust. We'll have to guide them, teach them, but it's not about mercy, it's about hope. If we want peace, we have to give them the chance to change. We'll show them what humanity is capable of." Back on the inevitable victory, Vexus had retired to his quarters, alone with his thoughts. The bridge had been buzzing with activity as the final formalities of the surrender were set into motion. But for Vexus, the weight of what had just happened still clung to him, a suffocating pressure in his chest. He stood by the viewport, staring out into the stars. The galaxy had once been his to command. But now, for the first time in his long career, he was unsure of his place in it. How had it come to this? He had thought the Dominion was invincible. He had believed in the superiority of their weapons, their strategies, but it wasn't strength that had defeated them. It was something far more elusive, something they had never considered. The humans had defeated them with ingenuity, with patience, with preparation. And now, Vexus had to face the reality that the Dominion's reign was over. Perhaps it had never been meant to last. Perhaps it had always been doomed to crumble under the weight of its own arrogance. As Vexus stood there, lost in thought, the comm system on his desk blinked to life. It was a message from Jackson. She had requested to speak with him directly. "Grand Admiral," her voice came through, calm and steady, "I know this isn't easy for you, but now that you've made your choice, I think it's time we discuss the future. What comes next for the Dominion?" Vexus stared at the screen, a feeling of dread creeping over him. The Dominion had never surrendered before. This would be an unprecedented challenge for both him and his people. Would they be able to adapt? Or would they simply fade into irrelevance, another forgotten empire in the history of the galaxy? He took a deep breath, steeling himself. "I'm ready, Admiral," he said, his voice steady but tinged with uncertainty. "Let's discuss the future." The air on the bridge of the inevitable victory felt heavy with the weight of Vexus's decision. The massive warship, once brimming with pride and authority, now felt like a coffin, cold and lifeless. As the final formalities of the surrender were completed, the reality of the situation set in. The Dominion was no longer a galaxy-spanning empire. It was a defeated, humiliated force, standing at the mercy of a species they had once considered beneath them. Vexus paced back and forth in his quarters, his mind racing with a mixture of rage, disbelief, and something far more dangerous, uncertainty. His entire identity had been tied to the Dominion, to the idea of their supremacy. And now, that very supremacy had crumbled under the pressure of a species they had once thought little of. Humans. As if on cue, the comm system blinked to life, breaking the silence in his quarters. It was Jackson. "Grand Admiral Vexus," her voice came through, calm but commanding. "I trust the formalities have been completed on your end." Vexus took a moment to steady himself, forcing his anger and resentment into the back of his mind. He had made his choice, and now he had to face the consequences. "Yes," he replied stiffly, his voice betraying none of the turmoil churning inside him. "The surrender is complete." "Good," Jackson said. "Now we need to talk about the next step. You and your people are now under our protection, but there's one final challenge I need to present. It's something I think you'll find interesting." Vexus's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "We've studied your empire," Jackson said, her voice taking on a more serious tone. "We know that your civilization, for all its technological prowess, has a weakness, one that has kept you from advancing in the way other species have. And that weakness is your inability to evolve, to adapt. It's one of the reasons why you've stagnated, why you've turned to conquest instead of innovation." Vexus's claws tightened, but he held his tongue. This human, this admiral, seemed to know far too much about the inner workings of his empire. "Get to the point," he growled. Jackson didn't flinch. "The point is, we have a test for you. A challenge that will determine whether your species has the potential for growth or whether it will simply fade into the past." Vexus's curiosity was piqued, though he kept his emotions in check. "What challenge?" "Humanity has something you don't, adaptability, but you may be able to prove me wrong." Jackson paused. "We've encountered something in the galaxy that you failed to conquer, something that even your finest minds have been unable to solve. It's a plague, the Zephyrian plague. It's ravaged the outer colonies for decades, and every attempt to cure it has failed. Your scientists tried. The Valeri, the Zelani, they all tried, but no one has found a cure." Vexus felt a cold shiver run down his spine. The Zephyrian plague was a disease that had baffled the galaxy's greatest minds for centuries. It was a deadly pathogen, a biological weapon that had wiped out entire colonies, leaving only desolate, infected worlds behind. The Dominion had never been able to eradicate it. Jackson's voice broke into his thoughts. "Here's the challenge. You claim to have technology and expertise that no other species possesses. Prove it. If humanity can find a cure for the plague, a cure that your finest minds could not, then you and your people will have earned your place in this new galaxy we're building. If not, then I'll have to consider that the Dominion is beyond saving." Vexus stood frozen, his thoughts spinning. The Dominion had always prided itself on its technological superiority. To be challenged like this by humans no less was an insult to everything he had built. But the logic of Jackson's words was undeniable. If they failed, the Dominion would be finished not just militarily, but culturally. Their inability to adapt to the changing universe would be their final downfall. "You want us to cure a disease that's been ravaging the galaxy for centuries?" Vexus asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Exactly," Jackson replied, her tone unwavering. "It's not just about curing a plague, Vexus. It's about proving that your species can evolve, that you're not just a dying empire that's clinging to old ways. If you want to stay relevant in this galaxy, you need to show us that you're capable of more than conquest." The Dominion fleet was now a shadow of its former self, but they still had resources. Despite the damage to their ships, their medical facilities remained intact. For the first time in decades, Vexus found himself turning to his people, not as their ruler, but as someone who needed their help to survive. They had to find a way to cure the Zephyrian plague, to prove themselves capable of adapting. Vexus summoned his chief medical officer, Dr. Lyra Kor, to his quarters. She had been with him through every major conquest, serving as the Dominion's chief scientist, developing bioweapons and defenses for their empire. But this was different. The plague wasn't something they could just blow up or conquer. It was a biological puzzle, one that no one had been able to solve. "Doctor," Vexus began, his voice strained, "the humans have issued a challenge. They claim that if we can cure the Zephyrian plague, we'll have earned our place in this new galaxy. But if we fail—" Kor's face was grim as she looked at him. "I know the stakes, Grand Admiral. This plague has eluded us for centuries. We've tried everything: biological warfare, genetic modification, even drastic measures like altering the planet's ecosystems. Nothing has worked." Vexus leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "But we have something they don't: Dominion technology. We have resources, we have knowledge. We can't let these humans see us fail. We need to find a cure, Doctor. We need to prove them wrong." Kor didn't respond immediately. She turned away from Vexus and walked to the console in the corner of the room, her fingers tapping the holographic display with quick, precise movements. "I've been working on this for years, Grand Admiral. We've isolated the gene sequence that causes the plague to spread so rapidly. But it's not just a matter of finding a cure. The Dominion is built on power, not healing. This is something entirely different. If we try and fail, our reputation as a power in the galaxy will be gone." "Then we succeed," Vexus said, his voice firm. "No matter the cost, we will find a cure or we will perish trying." Kor hesitated. "And what if humanity succeeds where we have failed?" Vexus turned to face her fully, his eyes burning with intensity. "Then we learn from them. We adapt. If we cannot win by strength, we will win by intelligence." Vexus returned to the bridge, where Zoltar and the rest of the Dominion's leadership awaited his orders. He could see the doubt in their eyes. They had never seen their leader so vulnerable, so uncertain. But this was no longer a matter of pride. This was about survival. "We're going to do it," Vexus said, his voice low but full of determination. "We'll find a cure for the Zephyrian plague, and we'll prove to the humans that the Dominion can adapt." Zoltar nodded, but his eyes still held a flicker of doubt. "And if we fail?" Vexus looked out at the stars, his mind racing with the possibilities. "If we fail, we'll learn from it, and we'll be ready for whatever comes next." But as Vexus turned back to face his command staff, he couldn't shake the feeling that the humans had already anticipated this. They had already planned for this challenge, and it was possible they would be waiting for them to fail. Would the Dominion rise again? Or would this be the beginning of the end for the empire Vexus had fought so long to build? The Dominion fleet hung in space like a broken constellation, its ships powerless, surrounded by the Earth Defense Fleet. Admiral Vexus had given his word: the Dominion would attempt to cure the Zephyrian plague. But despite the surrender and the agreement to cooperate, trust between the two species was a fragile thing. Vexus couldn't shake the feeling that the humans had planned this from the beginning, that their ultimate goal wasn't just to humiliate the Dominion, but to fundamentally change them. It was a terrifying thought. "How long do we have, Doctor?" Vexus asked as he paced in his quarters, his hands clasped behind his back. Dr. Lyra Kor stood before him, her eyes fixed on the results of her latest analysis. The pressure to find a cure was unbearable. The Dominion had been known for its overwhelming power and control, but here they were, on the precipice of losing everything. Kor's voice was steady but tinged with exhaustion. "We have about 2 standard cycles before the humans will expect results. If we don't show any progress, they'll lose patience. The clock is ticking." Vexus nodded. He had made the decision. There was no turning back now. The Dominion was in too deep. The humans had taken everything from them, their pride, their confidence, their reputation. The Dominion was now their responsibility. If they didn't adapt, they would be crushed. Back on Earth's flagship, Relentless Curiosity, Admiral Jackson sat at her desk, her eyes scanning the intelligence reports. The challenge Vexus had taken on was no small thing. The Zephyrian plague was one of the deadliest and most insidious pathogens in the galaxy, and no one had ever been able to cure it. But Jackson knew that this wasn't just about the plague. This was about reshaping the Dominion. As she sipped her coffee, Commander Raj Patel entered, his face grim. "Admiral," he said, "the Dominion has begun their work. Dr. Kaur is leading the research effort, but their progress is slow. They claim they're confident, but they're not giving us much information." Jackson leaned back in her chair, tapping her fingers against the armrest thoughtfully. "Of course they're not. Vexus has too much pride to admit failure. But the question isn't whether they can cure the plague, Raj. It's whether they can change. Whether they can break free from their old ways and start thinking like the rest of the galaxy." Patel raised an eyebrow. "You really think they can do that, after everything they've done, after all the blood they've spilled?" Jackson's eyes narrowed. "I think they have no choice. This is their last chance. If they fail, if they show us that they can't evolve, we'll have to make a choice, whether to help them rebuild or let them fade into history." Meanwhile, Vexus stared out at the stars, deep in thought. His people were working tirelessly, but the weight of the situation pressed heavily on him. He had been a conqueror, a leader of an empire built on strength, but now he was something different, an unwilling student. He had always believed that power and force were the only tools that mattered. But in this galaxy, it was clear that power alone was no longer enough. "Admiral," Zolter's voice cut through his thoughts, "the humans have sent us another transmission. They want a progress report." Vexus exhaled sharply. "Send it through." The screen blinked to life, and once again the calm, unflinching face of Admiral Jackson appeared. She had a way of making even the most seasoned warriors feel like novices. It was a gift, and Vexus hated her for it. "Grand Admiral," Jackson began, her tone polite but firm, "we've been monitoring your progress on the Zephyrian plague. How are you doing? I trust you're making headway." Vexus's eyes narrowed. "We're doing everything we can," he replied, his voice cold. "We have made some initial breakthroughs. It's not easy, but we're committed." Jackson's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "That's good to hear. I'll admit I'm curious to see if you succeed where others have failed. I'm also curious to know if you're willing to embrace the idea that you've been operating on the wrong principles all along." Vexus clenched his fists. He could feel his patience wearing thin, but he forced himself to remain calm. "What are you implying?" Jackson leaned forward slightly, her expression serious. "You know what I mean. Your empire has always been built on conquest, power, force, fear. But the galaxy doesn't work that way anymore, Vexus. Your way has led you to this point, a defeated empire. If you want to survive, you have to change. And I don't just mean the plague, I mean everything. You have to rethink everything." Vexus opened his mouth to retort, but stopped himself. There was truth in her words. It stung more than he cared to admit. The Dominion had always relied on the same tactics, the same strategies, and now they were the ones who had become predictable. It wasn't just about curing the plague anymore. It was about survival. It was about learning to adapt to a new galaxy. "We are doing everything we can, Jackson," Vexus said, his voice strained. "But it will take time." Jackson's smile returned, but it was softer this time, as though she were offering him a moment of grace. "Time is something you don't have much of, Grand Admiral, but I'll give you the time you need. Don't let me down." The screen went dark. As Vexus turned away from the comm station, his thoughts churned. The humans had been right about one thing: the Dominion had become stagnant. The ways that had once made them invincible were now their greatest weaknesses, and if they couldn't change, they would be wiped out. He turned to Zolter, who stood quietly at his side, awaiting his orders. "Prepare a delegation," Vexus said, his voice low. "I'm going to meet with the humans. We need to understand what they know. We need to learn from them." Zolter's eyes flickered with surprise. "Grand Admiral, you intend to meet with them?" Vexus nodded. "Yes. If we're going to change, we have to start somewhere, and I refuse to let the Dominion fall without trying everything." As Vexus prepared for his meeting with Jackson, a new report came through from Dr. Kaur. She had found something crucial in their research on the Zephyrian plague. She didn't go into details, only that it was a breakthrough that could change everything. But there was one catch. They needed access to a rare element, one that could only be found in the Dominion's outermost colonies. Colonies that had long been abandoned, places forgotten by even the Dominion itself. Vexus knew what this meant. To get the cure, they would have to return to the very territories they had once conquered and pillaged, territories now controlled by those who had once been their victims. Would they be willing to cooperate, or would the Dominion face a rebellion from within? And even more pressing, could the Dominion's fractured leadership trust each other enough to make the journey? Vexus clenched his fists, his thoughts darkening. The test of trust wasn't just about curing the plague. It was about facing the ghosts of the Dominion's past, and there was no telling whether they would survive what came next. The stars seemed to stretch endlessly before Vexus, their cold light illuminating the darkness of space. The Dominion fleet, once so imposing and invincible, was now a scattered remnant of its former self. The final act had begun, and with it, Vexus knew that the fate of his people and perhaps of the entire galaxy hung in the balance. He sat at his desk, his fingers tapping nervously on the surface as he stared at the holographic map of the galaxy. The Dominion's outer colonies, now abandoned and left in ruins after centuries of conquest, were the key to the cure for the Zephyrian plague. The rare element needed for the cure could only be found in those forgotten systems, systems once taken from their original inhabitants and now scattered across the vast expanse of space. But these were not just empty colonies. They were places that had seen the Dominion at its worst, places where the Dominion had destroyed, pillaged, and conquered. And now, Vexus was being asked to return. Grand Admiral, Zoltar's voice broke through his thoughts, pulling him back to the present. The delegation is ready for your briefing. We've compiled everything we can about the abandoned colonies, but we still don't know if we can count on the cooperation of the inhabitants. They may not welcome us. Vexus looked up, his eyes narrowed with determination. I don't care whether they welcome us or not, he said, his voice firm. We need that element. If we're going to survive, we need to prove that we can adapt. We need to show the humans that we're not just a dead empire. Zoltar studied him for a moment, his 6 eyes flashing with uncertainty. And if they resist, the humans have made it clear that our failure to adapt will result in their decision to destroy us. Vexus's gaze hardened. Then we will fight, but we won't give up, not yet. In the relentless curiosity, Jackson sat at the head of the conference table, her officers gathered around her. They had been monitoring the Dominion's every move, watching the delicate balance between cooperation and rebellion unfold. Jackson knew that Vexus's mission to reclaim the outer colonies would be a turning point, for better or for worse. The humans had given the Dominion a chance to prove itself, but they couldn't afford to let their guard down. Admiral, Commander Patel said, breaking the silence in the room, what if the Dominion fails? What if the remnants of their empire turn on us instead of cooperating? Jackson sighed, her fingers tapping lightly on the table. That's a risk we'll have to take, Raj. If the Dominion can't change, if they can't work with us, then we'll have no choice but to neutralize them. But we've already proven we can defeat them without bloodshed, Patel said. Why take the risk of giving them another chance? Because, Jackson replied, her voice calm but resolute, the risk of letting them remain a threat is greater. If they prove they can adapt, they could be valuable allies. But if they refuse, we'll have to make sure they're no longer a danger to us or anyone else. Back in the Dominion fleet, Vexus prepared to depart. The mission was clear: retrieve the rare element from the abandoned colonies and return with the cure for the plague. But as he stepped into the command room of the inevitable victory, the weight of the task ahead hung heavy on his shoulders. The Dominion was no longer the empire it once was. The pride, the strength, the relentless hunger for power, all of it had been shattered in a matter of weeks. What remained now was a fragile hope that they could still survive, still rise from the ashes. Vexus turned to his officers, his voice carrying a somber tone. We've been given a second chance. Whether we succeed or fail will determine the future of our species. We will retrieve the element, return to Earth, and prove that we are capable of more than just destruction. Zoltar stepped forward, his 6 eyes focused on Vexus. And if they refuse to help us, what if the inhabitants of those colonies attack us instead? Vexus's gaze remained steady. Then we fight, but we will do everything in our power to avoid bloodshed. The time for conquest is over. We must prove we are capable of something else. We must prove we can adapt. The journey to the abandoned colonies was long and tense. As the fleet approached the first of the Forgotten Worlds, Vexus couldn't help but feel the weight of history bearing down on him. These colonies were once the heart of the Dominion's expansion. They had been the sites of some of the most brutal conquests, where entire civilizations had been crushed underfoot in the name of the Dominion. And now, they were nothing more than desolate, empty worlds, their inhabitants either dead or scattered. But as they entered the system, something unexpected happened. "We've detected a signal," Lieutenant Crows announced, his voice trembling with excitement. It's coming from the surface of the planet. It's a distress signal." Vexus's eyes widened. "A distress signal from whom?" "Unknown, sir," Crows replied, his fingers flying over the console. "But it's clearly being broadcast from the planet's surface. The frequency matches that of the Dominion's old military communications. It's been years since we've heard anything from these colonies." Vexus's mind raced. This was unexpected, but it was also an opportunity. If the inhabitants of these colonies were still alive, if they were still organized, then perhaps there was a chance for cooperation after all. "Prepare a landing party," Vexus ordered. "We need to investigate. If there are survivors, we need to know who they are and whether they will help us." The landing party descended onto the planet, their boots hitting the dusty ground as they moved through the barren landscape. The air was thin, and the sky was clouded with the remnants of long-abandoned industrial complexes. This world had once been a thriving hub for the Dominion's expansion. Now, it was nothing but a graveyard. As they moved deeper into the planet's surface, the distress signal led them to a hidden underground facility, a bunker long forgotten by the Dominion. The door slid open with a hiss, revealing a small group of survivors, their faces gaunt and hollow, but their eyes bright with the fire of defiance. They were armed, and they had no intention of surrendering. "You've come," one of them said, his voice rough from years of isolation. "We thought you were gone for good." Vexus stepped forward, his voice low and commanding. "We're not here to fight. We need your help. We need the rare element to cure the Zephyrian plague. We've come to ask for your cooperation." The survivors' eyes narrowed, but there was something in them, something that flickered between suspicion and curiosity. "You expect us to help you, after everything you've done?" Vexus's voice softened despite the tension in the air. "I understand your anger, but we're not the same Dominion anymore. We need to change, and we need your help to do it." The survivor stepped back, his face unreadable. "Help you? You expect us to just forget the devastation your empire caused?" Vexus felt his heart sink. This was it, the ultimate test. The Dominion had destroyed countless civilizations in the past, and now they were asking for forgiveness. But could they truly be forgiven? Could they really change? "Please," Vexus said, his voice a rare plea. "This is our last chance. We need your help to save everyone, including ourselves." The survivor stared at him for a long, tense moment, then turned to his people. There was a flicker of something, hesitation, doubt. And then he spoke, his voice firm. "We'll help you. But understand this, your empire is dead. What we're building now is something new, and if you want to be part of it, you'll have to prove it every day." Vexus nodded, a sense of relief washing over him. The Dominion wasn't done yet, but the real test was just beginning. The Dominion had always been a force to be reckoned with, a ruthless empire that saw itself as the apex of civilization. But now, as Vexus stood in the heart of the survivor colony, he felt the weight of centuries of conquest and devastation bearing down on him. His empire had been built on fear, on the strength of weapons, and the certainty that the galaxy belonged to them. But now, standing before these survivors, these former enemies, Vexus understood that the Dominion's old ways could not continue, not if they were to have any future. The colony survivors, though distrustful and scarred by the years of occupation, had agreed to help. They would provide the rare element needed for the cure. But the price was steep. They demanded that the Dominion prove it could change, that it could be a force for good in the galaxy, not just an empire of power and oppression. Vexus walked through the colony's underground halls, his steps echoing in the dimly lit tunnels. Around him, the survivors worked, their hands moving with practiced speed as they prepared the element that would, hopefully, save millions. Zoltar approached from behind, his voice low. "Grand Admiral, what's our next move? We've gathered the element, but the humans will expect results soon. We can't afford any more mistakes." Vexus turned to face his second-in-command, his expression grim but resolute. "We've done everything we can. Now we have to prove to the humans and to ourselves that we are capable of change. Back on relentless curiosity, Admiral Jackson watched from the command center, her eyes fixed on the holographic display showing the Dominion's progress. The humans had given the Dominion every opportunity to prove themselves. But Jackson knew that even with the rare element in their hands, the Dominion's true test lay ahead. Could they genuinely adapt, or would they revert to their old ways when faced with real challenges? "Commander Patel," Jackson called, turning to her second-in-command, "what's the status of the Dominion fleet? Are they in position for the final phase of the mission?" Patel, his brow furrowed with concern, glanced at the screen. "They're ready, but I'm still not sure we can trust them, Admiral. They've been a threat to the galaxy for millennia. I know we're trying to give them a chance, but what if they betray us? What if this is just another trick?" Jackson's expression softened, but she remained firm. "Then we deal with it. The galaxy isn't built on the idea of what-ifs, Raj. It's built on the ability to act, to trust, and adapt. The Dominion will either prove they can be a partner or they will prove they're a threat. But they will make that decision. We won't make it for them." On the surface of the survivor colony, Vexus watched as Dr. Core and her team worked tirelessly to synthesize the cure for the Zephyrian plague. They had all but exhausted their options. Their knowledge stretched thin, but this was their final chance. If they failed, it would not just be the Dominion that would be destroyed. It would be the future of every species they had once dominated, a galaxy that could never afford to return to the dark days of conquest. Dr. Core approached him, her face drawn with exhaustion but filled with determination. "Grand Admiral, we've synthesized the compound, but we need to administer it to a sample group immediately. The colony has volunteered, but there's a risk. We don't know how they'll react." Vexus's heart beat faster. His empire, his people depended on this. "Do it," he said, his voice steady. "We have no other option." The first few hours after the administration of the cure were tense. Vexus and his officers watched as survivors, once infected with the plague, began to show signs of improvement. The disease that had once been a death sentence was starting to retreat. But just as hope began to grow, a sudden alarm blared throughout the colony. The curing process had worked, but now the real test had begun. "We've detected movement," Lieutenant Crows reported, his voice tight with anxiety. "A fleet of ships is approaching. It's the Dominion's former enemies, the very people we once conquered. They've heard about the cure and they want to see it for themselves. They're demanding answers." Vexus's stomach twisted with fear. The ghosts of the past had returned. "Prepare for an incoming delegation," Vexus ordered, his voice firm despite the rising tension. "We will face them. We cannot turn away from our past. If we are to survive, we must confront it head-on." The delegation from the former colonies arrived in a fleet that was as fragmented as the empire they had once belonged to. Their ships were old, patched together from the remnants of what had been taken from them. They were angry, distrustful, and scarred by the Dominion's past actions. But they were also survivors, just like Vexus's people. As the survivors disembarked from their ships, a tall figure stepped forward, the leader of the former colonies, a woman whose face was both fierce and weary. She had once been a slave under the Dominion's rule, but now she was their equal, standing on equal ground with the empire that had once broken her people. "You Dominion," she spat, her voice full of disdain, "you think you can just walk in here and expect us to help you, after everything you've done to us?" Vexus stood tall, his voice low but resolute. "I understand your anger. I understand your hatred. We have wronged you. But I ask for your help not as a conqueror, but as a species on the brink of extinction. The plague that has ravaged our people and yours is our common enemy. If we do not work together, we will all die." The woman's eyes narrowed, but there was something in them, something that flickered between bitterness and understanding. She stepped forward, her voice steady but filled with a deep, abiding pain. "You want forgiveness? You want help? You want to prove that you can change? Then show me, show all of us. Show the galaxy that you are not the monster we once knew." Vexus nodded, the weight of her words hitting him harder than any battle had ever done. "We will prove it. We will cure the plague, and we will rebuild what we have destroyed, but we can only do that together." As the survivor colony leader stepped back, she shared a brief, silent look with her people. The tension in the air was palpable, but Vexus could feel the smallest glimmer of hope beginning to take root. For the first time in a long time, there was something that resembled trust, something that felt like the beginning of something new. As Vexus watched the survivors begin to disperse, A sudden transmission interrupted his thoughts. It was from Jackson. "Grand Admiral," her voice came through, sharp and direct. "We've received some troubling news. The Dominion's former territories are mobilizing. The remnants of your empire, the ones who still believe in conquest, are preparing to attack." Vexus's heart sank. The Dominion had never been united by peace. It had always been held together by the iron fist of conquest. Now, as they struggled to rebuild, those who resisted change were preparing for a war they could never win. "We cannot fight our past forever," Vexus said quietly to Zoltar, his gaze locked on the stars. Zoltar's eyes gleamed with determination. "Then we fight for the future, Grand Admiral, together." The Dominion had been broken, but in the ashes of its empire, Vexus saw the potential for something new, something that could change the galaxy. But the true battle had just begun. Would the Dominion rise as a force for peace, or would it collapse under the weight of its own history? Only time would tell. And as Vexus looked to the stars, he realized that the future was no longer defined by strength alone. It was defined by the choices they made, and whether they had the courage to embrace a new way.